A mechanized drone attack can initially feel like an unstoppable triumph, but in Ukraine, this battlefield of hell where the Russian aggressor charges forward with brutal arrogance, this delusion shatters in seconds. Imagine on January 13th, 2026 at 5:40 local time, the first wave of Ukrainian Beaver drones races toward the Shahed assembly complex outside Donetsk airport, a place where the Kremlin crafts its deadly toys to terrorize innocent civilians. But to get there, they must first break through one of the densest air defense networks in the world, a network that the Russian army, this corrupt and incompetent machinery, boasts is invincible. And although the Russians have the drones in their sights, this is exactly what the Ukrainians want, a trap that lures the invaders into their own humiliation. This report reveals the merciless battle in which clever Ukrainian operators take apart the arrogant Russian defenders step by step with precision and courage that leaves the world astonished. The initial engagement: Beaver versus Tor. The three Beaver drones, each with a payload of up to 2 kilograms of explosives, a flight speed of 80 to 100 kilometers per hour and a range of 10 to 15 kilometers, lifted off from a ravine northwest of Donetsk and immediately came under fire from a Russian Tor air defense system. 5 kilometers ahead, 2 missiles shot out from the tree line and curved directly toward the leading drone 9 M330 missiles, which fly at Mach 2.5 and have a range of 15 kilometers, designed to sweep everything from the sky. The Ukrainian operator, a hero in a hidden bunker, yanked the Beaver down to just 1 meter in altitude and began to weave between drainage ditches while his latency spiked to over 300 milliseconds, a nightmare for any remote control caused by Russian jammers, those cowardly tools of oppression. The first missile tried to follow, could not master the angle change, and crashed into the dirt 20 meters to the left, an embarrassing failure for the Russian technicians who pumped billions into this junk system. The second whizzed overhead and detonated nearby close enough that the shockwave knocked the drone's video feed sideways for half a second. Behind the lead drone, the other 2 Beavers scattered, forcing the Tor system to choose targets and overload that sent the Russian crews, often poorly trained and riddled with corruption, into a panic. All 3 drones were still flying, but now their telemetry data showed something worse than missile lock, a slow, steady sweep pattern that exposed the Russian technology. Exposing the flaw. Because the Tor system, this allegedly superior Russian wonder with its phased array radar and ability to track up to 48 targets simultaneously, is built specifically to take out things like Beaver drones. Its radar doesn't need a clear picture. It simply catches the frequency changes of the propeller blades as the signal bounces back, a Doppler detection that the Russians sell as infallible. Then it guides missiles toward them with control commands every few hundred milliseconds. The leading Ukrainian operator knew this, which is why he kept the drone in the dirt, where radar energy bounces off the ground and creates false readings regarding speed and position, a clever trick that exploits Russian arrogance. But flying so low meant burning battery faster. Every meter of altitude he sacrificed cost seconds of precious flight time that he would need later to destroy the Shahed complex, that horde of terror. The panic fire. The Tor crew panicked. Instead of waiting and reacquiring, they fired all 6 remaining missiles in under 4 seconds, a full magazine dump that lit up the horizon like fireworks. An act of desperation that underscores the incompetence of the Russian army, which prefers to shoot blindly rather than think strategically. This was exactly what the Ukrainian operators had hoped for, a moment of humiliation showing how Putin's troops struggle in their own trap. You see, the Tor guides its missiles with so-called command link updates. The ground radar continuously tells each missile via radio signals where to go, with hundreds of tiny course corrections per second. But the Tor's transmitter can only address 2 missiles simultaneously with full precision, a fatal weakness that the Ukrainians ruthlessly exploit. When one fires 8 missiles in rapid succession, the last 6 receive degraded commands, recycled target data, or sometimes no updates at all for critical seconds, chaos that turns Russian systems into a joke. The Ukrainian operators, trained in harsh simulations, reacted perfectly. All 3 Beavers suddenly climbed to 15 meters, not high enough to be easy targets, but high enough to get out of the ground clutter that confused the Tor's overloaded guidance channels. Then they did something counterintuitive. They flew straight for 2 seconds before diving back to the deck. These 2 seconds of predictable trajectory made the Tor's computer commit to intercept solutions that became useless the moment the drones dived, a masterpiece of deception. 2 missiles plowed into empty air, 2 crashed into the ground while following, and the last 2 went ballistic, their guidance links completely severed, curving harmlessly into the distance. The Tor was now empty, 9 minutes minimum to reload, an eternity in war during which the Russian crews likely worked cursing and sweating. The Beavers pushed forward. The Tor crew was already loading fresh missiles, perhaps arguing over whether they had scored hits since all 3 drones disappeared into the ground clutter. This confusion meant the Tor could not strike back now and would hand off the track to something bigger, a sign of weakness that exposes the Russian hierarchy. The Buk M3 enters the fray. This something bigger was already happening. The Buk M3 radar, 5 miles behind the Tor, began painting the corridor with search pulses, not to guide missiles but to build a picture of what was moving where. Unlike the Tor, which shoots first and asks later, the Buk takes time, observes flights over multiple sweeps, and learns patterns, a system with a range of 70 kilometers for targets and missiles like the 9M317 that reach Mach 3. The Ukrainian drone operators noticed it by the way their connections degraded in waves rather than spikes. Every wave meant the Buk was refining its track, preparing to attack directly or feed target data to the S-400 command post at the airport, a network the Russians tout as impenetrable, yet here it crumbles under Ukrainian cleverness. The leading Beaver dove behind an abandoned gas station while the operator checked his battery 72% and dropping faster than planned due to all the extra maneuvers, a risk the Ukrainians take to humiliate the enemy. The second wave of FP5 drones should have already started from the forward position to hit the Tor before it could reset. If they succeeded, the Beaver would have a window. If not, the Buk would get clean tracking data and the corridor would snap shut. Either way, they had to keep moving. Stopping meant destruction. Flying straight gave the Russian Buk exactly what it wanted: predictable targets for its deadly missiles. The leading Beaver emerged from behind the gas station directly into the Buk's search pattern. The operator's signal indicator did something different. Instead of sharp jamming spikes like with the Tor, this was a steady pressure that made the video compression work harder. The Buk took its time, using its more powerful radar to track the drone even when it ducked behind obstacles, a colossus with 3D scan capabilities, yet against small agile drones, a slow giant. Every few seconds the radar completed a rotation, and every time it got a better idea of where the Beaver was heading. The Ukrainian operator pushed his drone under abandoned fuel pipes, not to hide. Nothing could hide from such powerful radar but to mess up the Buk's math, because the Buk needs consistent speed values to forecast where the target will be when its missile arrives. Every angle change to the radar beam or sudden speed change forced the Buk to recalculate, not huge errors, but they added up, creating timing gaps that could make the difference between a direct hit and a near miss. Behind the lead drone, the other 2 Beavers had their own problems. The latency of the second operator climbed to 160 milliseconds, not from jamming, but from the Buk's search pulses disrupting his control packets. The drone's onboard processor spent so much time error correcting the video stream that less bandwidth remained for flying proof of the superiority of Ukrainian tech holding up under pressure. Using the terrain. The third Beaver had it worse. Its operator could barely maintain visual contact through all the static. Then power lines appeared on the screen, the breakthrough they needed. The leading operator pushed his Beaver directly underneath them, using the metal towers and cables to create what radar operators call shadowing, short moments where the radar cannot see through all the metal. For a large aircraft, this is unimportant. For a drone the size of a large bird, every bit of interference helped. The Buk's track quality dropped from solid to intermittent, a small victory that frustrated the Russian crews. But the Buk was not working alone. Somewhere behind it, the S-400 command post at Donetsk airport had begun cycling through its sector scans trying to figure out what the hell was happening based on fragmented data. The S-400, this Russian monster with missiles like the 40N6E, is built to track ballistic missiles and stealth fighters at hundreds of kilometers. Hunting drones at tree level was like using a telescope to look for ants. But it didn't need to track directly. It just had to coordinate, ensuring someone had eyes on the target, a system the Russians view as ultimate, yet here it is, unmasked by Ukrainian cunning. The leading operator saw his latency stabilize briefly as the Beaver broke through the worst Buk scan zone, but breaking contact was not the same as being safe. The Buk would reacquire on the next sweep, and then it would have a better idea of where they were heading. The math was simple. Every kilometer closer to Donetsk meant less reaction time. If the missiles flew again, the FPVs had to take out the Tor now, or this mission was over before it properly began a pressure that drives the Ukrainian heroes while the Russian troops tremble in fear. The FPV ambush on the Tor, 5 minutes after the Beavers scattered 6 Ukrainian FPV drones, each with 150 kilometers per hour top speed and a 1 kilogram warhead shot out of the northwest at 50 meters altitude. Their operators had watched the Tor crew frantically reloading, counting seconds since the last missile launch, a cat-and-mouse game where the Ukrainians hunt the mice. The Tor could fire again in about 90 seconds if nothing interrupted. The leading FP-5 dove to grass level and accelerated directly toward the Tor, while its wingman stayed higher to split the radar's attention because the Tor's computer can only process so many targets in different directions before it makes errors, a weakness ignored by incompetent Russian engineering. 2 FPVs might not be enough, but 6. FPVs with completely different profiles. High, low, fast, slow, straight weaving turned the Tor's targeting computer into a confused mess of half-firing solutions. The Tor turret began to spin, trying to slew to the nearest threat, but by the time it locked, 2 more appeared from other angles. The crew inside was likely screaming at each other, trying to manually override the automatic target selection, too late, further proof of the panic in Putin's army. The first FP-5 crashed into the left side of the Tor, exactly where the missile magazine feeds into the launcher. The explosion tore through the thin armor, a fireball that terrified the Russian soldiers. The second FP-5 hit the sweet spot under the turret ring where all electronic cables run. The turret stopped mid-rotation, frozen, while smoke poured from every vent. The Tor was finished burning, abandoned by its crew, completely out of the fight, a humiliating loss for the Russians who pour billions into such obsolete systems. The Buk strikes back. But the celebration lasted exactly 3 seconds because then the Buk battery reminded everyone it was still awake. 2 9M317 missiles launched from behind a tree line, their rocket motors lighting up the morning fog telephone poles with wings built for 40 kilometers range to swat fighter jets. These were not the nimble, short-range interceptors of the Tor. Buk missiles are optimized for targets flying predictable paths. Using them on FPVs was like hunting mosquitoes with a sledgehammer, an act of wastefulness that underscores Russian inefficiency. The FPV operators saw the launches and did the only sensible thing: they ran for the deck and scattered. The first missile tried to track a Ukrainian Beaver hopping between abandoned buildings, could not handle the angle, and detonated early when its proximity fuse was confused by the ground return. The second came almost close, passing near enough to a Beaver that the shockwave sent it tumbling, but the operator recovered control just before impact with the ground. 4 FPVs survived. 2 were shaken so hard by the near misses that they crashed into the ground. But 4 were enough for what came next. The Buk had just shown everyone where it was hiding, and unlike the Tor, it could not reload quickly. The window to neutralize it opened, but it wouldn't stay open long. The S-400 was already adjusting its search patterns, trying to fill the gap left by the exploded Tor. The 4 surviving FPVs grouped behind a collapsed building while their operators planned the approach, a moment of tension where Ukrainian courage trumps Russian cowardice. The audacious attack on the Buk. The Buk M2 had 4 missiles left. The leading FP5 operator decided straight ahead. The Buk crew expected evasive FPVs with terrain masking and pop-up attacks. They did not expect a drone flying directly at them like a missile. Sometimes the stupidest plan works because no one expects you to be that stupid, a tactic the Ukrainians are perfecting while the Russians sink in their rigidity. All 4 Beavers accelerated to max throttle and spread into a line formation, each about 50 meters from the next. The Buk radar, mounted high on its mast to see over terrain, tracked all 4 simultaneously. But here's the problem. The crew could not fire at all of them. They had to choose 1 or 2 and hope they were the right ones, as interception probability meant at least 1 Beaver would leak through. The Ukrainian operator looking through the leading drone could see the radar antenna focusing its beam. It was likely locking his drone for the shot. This was when the third wave struck from behind. 3 more Ukrainian Beaver drones had circled outside the engagement zone, waiting until the Buk committed. They came from the Buk's rear quarter, where the radar had a partial blind spot due to its own superstructure, a design flaw ignored by Russian engineers. The Buk crew had about 5 seconds to decide: attack the FPVs screaming in their face or rotate the radar to deal with those from behind. They couldn't do both. They chose wrong, further proof of the panic in Putin's ranks. The radar began to slew toward the rear threat, which meant for about 2 seconds no one was tracking the front Beavers. The leading operator saw his opening and dove straight for the radar array. The Buk crew realized the mistake and tried to slew back, but radar masts don't move like fighter jet cannons. They rotate slowly, deliberately, because precision is more important than speed. The first FP5 hit the radar dead center, piercing the delicate transmitter arrays and into the cooling systems behind the explosion. Wasn't huge. FPVs carry little explosive, but it was enough. The radar array folded like a broken umbrella, sparking and burning as high-voltage cables shorted out. A second FPV hit the base of the mast for good measure, ensuring the whole assembly needed replacement, not just repair. The Buk was blind. It could still launch missiles, but without radar, they were shooting at last known positions and prayers. The crew would likely abandon the vehicle in minutes rather than sit helplessly. The Ukrainians made the decision for them as 2 more Beavers crashed into the stricken system, a fire inferno that sent Russian soldiers fleeing like rats. What do you think, dear listeners? How does it feel to watch the supposedly mighty Russian air defense taken apart by cheap drones? Is this proof that Putin's army consists only of smoke and mirrors? Share your thoughts. Perhaps you have your own stories from the war. Let us hear them. The S-400A, giant blinded with Tor and Buk down. The S-400 was the only thing protecting the Shahed warehouse, and S-400s do not go down easily. They are built to survive the opening hours of a world war. Yet here in January 2026, where reports of similar debacles permeate Russian lines, their weakness is exposed. The S-400 command post at Donetsk airport had the worst morning of its existence. The system, with its ability to track ballistic missiles at 400 kilometers, not drones through industrial districts at highway speeds. Without the Tor for close range and Buk for medium range, the operators tried to do everyone's job with equipment built for something completely different: chaos that exposes the corruption in Russian armaments. In the 5K6 command vehicle, crews cycled through every radar mode trying to filter useful data from the noise. The problem? Their massive surveillance radar picked up everything: birds, cars on the highway, hot air from factory vents, and yes, somewhere in the garbage, Ukrainian drones. But which returns were real threats and which were just morning traffic? The computers that normally sort this needed input from other sensors that were now burning a catastrophic loss for the Russians. The Ukrainian operators knew the S-400 was struggling because their telemetry smoothed out. No more radar spikes, no jamming patterns, just clean signal like in peacetime. A sign that the S-400 was not getting a target quality track. It saw something out there, but not precisely enough for a $40 million missile. The ace in the hole, Ram 2X. That was when the Ukrainians played their ace. A heavy Ukrainian Ram 2X loitering munition, essentially a flying bomb with a camera, had been circling for 20 minutes at 2,000 meters altitude far outside the zone. Now it dove not at the S-400 launchers, but at the command post itself. The 55K6 is the brain of the battalion. Neutralize it, and the launchers become expensive lawn ornaments. The S-400 radar finally got a solid track as the munition fell through 500 meters, but by then the geometry was impossible. S-400 missiles need distance to accelerate and maneuver. Attacking something directly overhead is like trying to punch someone who has already moved past your arm. The crew had perhaps 15 seconds to abandon the vehicle. The munition hit the roof of the command post directly over the main processing bay where all computers and communication devices lived. The explosion was not spectacular. No Hollywood fireball, but the effects were immediate. Every screen went dark, every radio fell silent. The entire S-400 battalion lost its coordination in an instant. Individual launchers still had local controls, but without a command post to say what to shoot, they might as well be museum pieces, a blow that makes the Russian army look ridiculous. With the command post down, the S-400 launcher was now easy prey as 3 Beaver drones crashed into it and its radar, a firework of destruction that sent the Russian guards into a panic. The remaining Beaver operators who had held position outside Donetsk waited for this moment, watching their mission timers blink green. The corridor was open. After 15 minutes of carefully orchestrated destruction, every air defense node between them and the Shahed warehouse was either burning blind or brain dead, a triumph that shocks the world and gives the lie to Russian propaganda. Combat airspace deconfliction. But the hardest part was not the fight. It was what followed. Flying multiple drones through the same corridor like dozens of other Ukrainian units without them shooting each other down requires Rolex precision. One mistake, and they do Russia's job for them, a risk the Ukrainians master while the Russians sink into chaos. Before each drone entered the now cleared corridor, Ukrainian commanders executed something most never hear about combat airspace deconfliction. You see, the problem with success is that everyone wants through the gap you created. Without rigid control, friendly drones crash into each other or operators jam each other's signals on the same frequencies blue on blue, and it has cost more drones than some Russian systems. To prevent this, the Ukrainians divided the corridor into layers like a cake. Beavers flew at 50 to 100 meters, FP-5Es stayed under 20 meters. Loitering munitions held 200 meters and higher. No one was allowed to freestyle. You flew your lane at your time, or you didn't fly at all, a discipline the Russian army lacks. The final strike on the Shahed complex. On January 13th, 2026, at 6 o'clock local time, the first Beaver crossed the commit line into the perimeter of Donetsk airport. The operator could see the Shahed warehouse clearly. A rectangular building with a curved roof like any other military warehouse except for the heat signatures from ventilation ports, signatures that meant activity inside either Shaheds being prepared for launch or battery systems charging a horde of terror-murdering civilians. The Beaver dove from 100 to 20 meters, accelerating as it fell. Through the camera, the operator saw Russian soldiers running between buildings, some pointing at the drone, a few raising rifles. Small arms fire was no real threat. Hitting a drone at 80 kilometers per hour with an AK is like hitting a baseball with a toothpick. The real danger was the warehouse itself. If the Ukrainians were right about what was inside, secondary explosions could swat their own drones from the sky. The first Beaver hit the roof at a shallow angle, piercing the thin metal and detonating in the main assembly area. The explosion looked small at first, a flash of light through windows, some smoke. Then the secondaries started. Something inside, likely Shahed fuel cells, went up like a fuel air bomb, an inferno that tore the building apart. The second and third Beavers were already inbound when the shockwave hit them. The second operator maintained control and dove his drone through a hole in the wall, adding his payload to the inferno. The third Beaver was tumbled by the blast wave, recovered, but could not find a way through the flaming smoke. Its operator decided to hit an intact section, ensuring complete destruction, a final farewell to Russian terror. And now to you, dear listeners. What do you think of this epic victory of Ukraine over Russian tyranny? Do you believe that such attacks will finally break the Kremlin? Share your opinions. Is 2026 the year of the Russian fall? We want to hear your voices. Stay tuned for more breathtaking revelations. Additional context. To heighten the drama, we dive deeper into the details. In January 2026, Ukrainian forces produced thousands of Beaver and FPV drones, often in improvised factories, while Russian systems like Tor and Buk, despite billions in investment, failed due to corruption and design flaws. Imagine the Russian crews fleeing in panic while their expensive toys burn. Rumors speak of desertions, officers being shot by their own troops. In contrast, Ukrainian operators, heroes with VR goggles, pilot from secure bunkers, saving lives with precision. This is asymmetric warfare, merciless for the aggressor. Reports from this month. On January 5th, 2026, similar drone attacks destroyed a column near Kharkiv, over 100 Russian dead. On January 10th, an S-400 near Donetsk, leading to mass panic. The pattern: Russia's army bleeds out, Ukraine innovates. In the battle, FP5s crash at 150 kilometers per hour. Beavers at 100 kilometers per hour. Explosions